22nd edition of the FIFA World Cup is set to kick off in Qatar next year, but its preparations are marred by reports of abuse and human rights violations. Anti-slavery organisation Freedom United says it receives regular reports of migrant worker abuse and forced labour, despite earlier assurances of reform from the Qatari Ministry of Labour. The organisation says Qatar's kafala system, which ties employees to their employer for the length of their contract, makes it practically impossible for workers to leave their employment, effectively trapping them and enabling abuse. Freedom United is calling on the Qatar government to fulfil its promise of reforming the system with the same urgency it's dealt with World Cup preparations. For more on this, I'm joined by Joanna James, Executive Director at Freedom United. She joins us from Nairobi, Kenya, and you all do such good work there, Joanna. I mean, this is obviously an important focus. It's just around the corner, and promises of reform haven't been happening. What is it that you're seeing?
Thank you very much, Jane, for inviting me. We launched our campaign in 2016, and we've directed our campaign to the Qatari Ministry of Labour to make these reforms for migrant workers and to realise them in practice. And that's our concern. As you said, we have seen promises and we're very excited about those promises, but the reality is that things aren't seeming to change on the ground. The problem is with this system is that migrant workers in states like Qatar who have a sponsor, although the idea is that it creates more of a balance between the two, it ends up giving far more power to the employer and little to no power to the employee, to the extent that employees cannot leave their employer without permission. So for the low-skilled, low-paid workers, it sets up conditions that meet the requirement for the definition of forced labour. So the typical accounts that we receive include excessively long working hours, physical or other assault, no time off, deliberate isolation from home and families, and a lack of appropriate protection in dangerous environments. And the kind of methods that keep migrant workers from leaving their jobs include withholding their passports, billing them with high recruitment expenses, withholding salaries, not giving or renewing residence permits, and threatening them with deportation. And we're very concerned by this. I mean, migrant workers make up about 90% of the workforce in Qatar. So these forced labour conditions can affect a large number of people. And that's why we're campaigning to see these changes that we've promised implemented.
I mean, I lived there for 13 years, and obviously you heard just the most horrific stories. Change was happening then. I had a few friends working for the organisation that was overseeing the reform and the games. And she said that, you know, I mean, sadly, this is not seen as a problem for many people. Those who need to make the change, this kind of workforce is not seen as a problem. It's almost been dehumanized.
In fact, that's a very common feature of exploitation, extreme exploitation and forced labour that is a form of modern slavery. It's because other people are discriminated against and not treated as equals that it gives some kind of societal permission to exploit the next person, which is completely unacceptable. Everybody is born free and equal, as they absolutely should be. However, there's been a lot of pressure mounting in the run-up to the World Cup, 2022 World Cup. And the pressure has really grown since it was awarded this 2022 World Cup. And we're not alone as Freedom United. A lot of organisations and advocates have been lobbying the government of Qatar. And also the International Labour Organization have been working with them. And clearly there is a response. I mean, clearly we're so frustrated and we're not seeing the change we want to see. But the fact that we are seeing a response in commitments from the Qatar government to make change. So, for example, it's said that workers should no longer be required to get permission from their employer to leave the country, which would be a really significant step. It's something that we very much welcome. However, we're still struggling to see these changes put in place. So I think the reality is that there is an awareness that this is not acceptable. It's clear that people want to see a change. The government of Qatar are responding to that, but it's slow. and we can't wait longer. We want to see these reforms that have been made. We want to see them dismantled. We want to see this kafala system completely dismantled. So there are no restrictions on migrant workers from changing jobs.
But it's also, sorry, excuse me, jumping in here.
Also,
I know of some workers who thought they were going there to play football, and they ended up, it had nothing to do with football. It was just a bit of a ruse to get them over there. So this is happening next year. Hundreds of thousands of people are going to be going to the country. I'm sure the workforce will be kept well out of sight. What happens afterwards?
It's a very good question. In fact, most of the migrant workers aren't actually directly working necessarily on World Cup infrastructure. I mean, there's a lot of peripheral construction that goes on just around the World Cup event. As you say, lots of people will be travelling, so there's a need for providing hotels, accommodation, etc. So, yes, there is a concern that the tension will dissipate. That's why it's really important that these changes are codified in law so that they can't be stepped back from, and that we have sustainable change. We want to see penalties introduced for employers where contract substitution takes place, which is the kind of situation that you explained, where someone thinks they're going for one thing and they get there and something else happens. The wages are much lower. We want to make sure that employees' passports are returned and that they hold their own passports and given their own ID so that they can be better protected. And to stop the practice of employers from issuing objections to exit visas. If we can get proper penalties in place, it will be a sustainable change. And that societal attitude towards how migrant workers are treated can change. And that's what we're hoping to see.
OK, Joanna James, let's speak closer to the time next year anyway.